Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Good evening. Great to see you all. Thanks for being here. And welcome to the World Over Live. Big show for you tonight. The Holy See's permanent observer to the United Nations, Archbishop Francis Chullikatt, is here to discuss how he makes the Church's voice heard in this important international arena and some contemporary challenges he's facing. And blogger Thomas Peters of the American Papist blog is here to talk about the Vatican's latest effort in the digital arena, as well as the news of the week. We really want you to be a part of the show this week, so we've given a little extra time on the back end. If you have a topic or a question that you'd like us to address or throw our way, the number is 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally, 205-271-2980. Or drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Major gains for gay rights activists across the Americas during the past week. In New York, just before midnight this past Friday, 4 Republicans joined 29 Senate Democrats to legalize gay marriage in the State House there. Governor Andrew Cuomo, a Catholic, swiftly signed the bill into law. New York's bishops immediately condemned the legislation. In a statement, they said the law, which alters radically and forever humanity's historic understanding of marriage, leaves us deeply disappointed and troubled. End quote. They further warned that gay marriage advocates will now attempt to enact government sanctions against churches and religious organizations that oppose it. Bishop DiMarzio of Brooklyn instructed his schools and churches to reject any honor bestowed upon them by the governor and asked that they, quote, not invite any state legislator to speak or be present at any parish or school celebration if they supported the bill. New York joins 5 other states and the District of Columbia in legalizing gay marriage. Also this week, a Brazilian judge has approved its country's first gay marriage. The state judge accepted the petition of 2 Sao Paulo men to convert their civil union into a full marriage. In a court statement, the Sao Paulo judge said his decision is based on an earlier Supreme Court ruling and on Brazil's constitution, which apparently outlines how a civil union can be converted into a legal marriage. If the ruling sticks, Brazil will be the largest country in the world to uniformly legalize gay marriage. It is also the world's most populous Catholic nation. And on Wednesday, the Rhode Island legislature passed its same-sex civil union measure. Governor Lincoln Chafee said he will sign the legislation, calling it an incremental step toward gay marriage. The law treats civil unions much like marriage. It does, however, provide an exemption, allowing religious institutions not to recognize such unions. Also on Wednesday, President Barack Obama closed out Gay Pride Month with a White House reception for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender activists, citing the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and his refusal to defend the Defense of Marriage Act in court. The president touted his record on gay issues and further lauded New York's new marriage law.
I've met my commitments to the LGBT community. I have delivered on what I promised. And what gives me hope is the deeper shift that we're seeing. It's playing out in legislatures like New York. It's playing out in courtrooms. It's playing out in the ballot box.
And there is a disturbing trend emerging in Holland, as the application of the nation's liberal euthanasia laws are now including people with dementia. According to a government report leaked by Holland State Television, 21 people with early-stage dementia who were otherwise healthy and not suffering were killed by their doctors in this past year. It is the first time dementia victims appeared in the government's euthanasia statistics. To qualify for euthanasia in Holland, a person must demonstrate to 2 doctors that he's of sound mind and is making an informed choice that he'd rather die than face unbearable suffering. Because of the sound mind stipulation in the law, dementia victims are opting to be killed before the disease fully sets in. In 2010, 2,700 Dutch were legally killed by their doctors. More struggles for the church in China as the ordination of a Vatican-approved bishop was postponed after communist officials arrested the prelate. According to church officials, coadjutor Bishop-elect Joseph Sun Zhizhen of Handan in the northern Hebei province is presently being, quote, looked after by government officials. He was detained after a pre-ordination retreat on Sunday. The 89-year-old bishop currently leading the diocese suffered a heart attack upon hearing the news and is undergoing treatment at a diocesan-run hospital. Meanwhile, government authorities moved forward with the ordination of a new bishop without the approval of the Holy See. On Wednesday, Father Paul Lei Xin-in was made the bishop of the Diocese of Leshan in southwest China. The leader of the government-backed Catholic Patriotic Association, Bishop Johann Fang Jinyao, was the principal consecrator. Chinese officials have indicated that they will install as many as 40 new bishops without waiting for Vatican approval. And back home in Texas this week, it was announced that 6 Episcopal parishes will join the Catholic Church as part of the new Ordinariate, a floating diocese set up in the wake of Anglicalorum Caetibus, the Pope's outreach to disaffected Anglicans. The head of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity at the Vatican confirmed the news, adding that these parishes have expressed the desire to become Catholic for at least 10 years. Earlier this month, St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Bladensburg, Maryland, became the first community in the U.S. to join the planned Ordinariate. And the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul marked Pope Benedict's 60th anniversary of priestly ordination. In Rome, during a Mass, the Pope conferred the pallia on more than 40 new archbishops. That's the white woolen stole emblazoned with 6 black crosses. It symbolizes an archbishop's pastoral authority and his unity with the successor of Peter. Among the U.S. bishops receiving the pallium were Archbishops Paul Coakley of Oklahoma City, Jose Gomez of Los Angeles, Gustavo Garcia Siller, who replaced Archbishop Gomez in San Antonio, and Archbishop James Sartain of Seattle. Other notables among the archbishops were Gerald LaCroix of Quebec, and Jose Palma of the Philippines, and Welshman George Stack of Cardiff. And a happy 60th anniversary to Pope Benedict. And finally, on Tuesday, an historic first for Pope Benedict. On that day, he became the first pope to post a message on Twitter. In it, he announced the launch of the new Vatican News website, surely a challenge for a man who thinks in volumes and speaks in paragraphs. The Holy Father was able to tweet within Twitter's strict 140-character limit. He wrote, "Dear friends, I just launched news.va. Praised be our Lord Jesus Christ. With my prayers and blessings, Benedictus XVI." Moments earlier, the 21st century Pope launched the news website by swiping his finger across an iPad. The Holy Father was amused and seemingly a bit bemused by it all. The new news site brings together for the first time the Vatican's numerous communications outlets: Fides News Agency, L'Osservatore Romano, the Press Office, Vatican Information Service, Vatican Radio, and CTV Television. Just days after going live, the new Vatican site already had 7,000 Facebook friends and more than 60,000 followers on Twitter. Of course, Pope Benedict officially has more than 1.1 billion followers worldwide. What does he need Twitter for? And with the summer upon us, why not take some time for some eternal refreshment? The Truth and Life audio Bible is fully dramatized. It's like a radio drama by a cast of world-renowned actors, Michael York, Blair Underwood, John Rhys Davies, and many more. You can get your copy of the Truth and Life dramatized audio Bible at raymondarroyo.com. Not .com. Click the banner at the top of the website. And while there, you can also learn about my latest hilarious literary collaboration launching July 12th at bookstores everywhere. It's called Of Thee I Zing, America's Cultural Decline from Muffin Tops to Body Shots. Ugh. It's a fun read. Up next, Thomas Peters is here to opine on the news and Archbishop Francis Chullikatt on the Vatican's efforts at the UN. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My first guest is part of a growing number of media-savvy Catholics who aren't afraid of making their opinions known. He's been blogging about life as a young Catholic American since 2005. And he authors the American Papist blog on CatholicVote.org. He holds 2 graduate degrees in theology, too. And he's been branded by the New York Times as one of the new breed of theological conservatives. Here to talk about the Vatican's recent forays into cyberspace, the news of the week, and take your questions. Please welcome Thomas Peters.
Thank you. Good to be here,
Thomas. Thanks for coming back. Let's talk. I want to start with the kind of fun, light news. The only happy news I have to report this week. Pope Benedict launched this new news site.
Yeah.
Why did it take so long for the Vatican to bring together all of this information that they have at their fingertips?
Well, I know it's a frustration, but I think it's right that the Vatican moves a little bit slower. I mean, I think we can all agree that life is moving very fast right now, and sometimes too fast. Yeah. And, you know, while people like myself can be impatient at times, the new website is really wonderful, news.va. It's a good resource. You know, I'm looking forward to using it. It's actually something that's going to be useful to me, and I tend to, you know, be a complete glutton for information. Yeah. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think they took their time to get it done right.
Well, it's nice to see everything in one place. You
yes,
used to have to
right.
go here and there and rifle through all sorts of odd translations, and you'd end up on the German site when you wanted the English, and it was troubling. You had Pope Benedict sending his first tweet. How significant is this, or is this just another kind of pop culture display?
I think it shows that Benedict wants to be wherever people are. And so, I mean, that's kind of my takeaway. The fact that he has an iPad now puts him ahead of me, so I've got some catching up to do.
Well,
I'm still on the old laptop.
Yeah, well, what do you need an iPad for? You know, iPad, it does what a computer does. I mean, I know it's a nice little gizmo to carry around and show, look, I have the iPad 2, not the iPad 1. But what does it do beyond that? I mean,
I guess it's a little bit more portable. Yeah. So.
Okay.
He's used to manuscripts. This is all like light years ahead.
He can carry around all those encyclicals and those books in his library on the iPad, I guess.
Yeah.
If you'd like to comment or give us a ring, if you have a question, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. You could even send it from your iPad. We don't hold that against you. Let's talk about this gay marriage vote that happened in New York this past week. It has sort of set a lot of people back on their heels, mass confusion as to what this means. How detrimental is this to the cause of marriage, in your opinion?
Well, there's no getting around the fact that it's a defeat. But it's very easy to rely on the mainstream media to make a big deal every time marriage suffers a loss, and to make almost no deal in comparison when marriage actually wins victories. And so the big picture that most people who don't follow the issue as closely as we do is that Maryland and Rhode Island this year defeated gay marriage bills, and there was simultaneous efforts in Minnesota and Indiana to move forward on protecting marriage as one man and one woman. So I think that the best situation we can think of in New York is that it's a wake-up call. Catholics and other Christians have to realize that the only reason that gay marriage could possibly be inevitable is if we stop fighting in the public square to defend it.
Okay. We hear a lot of discussion this week about this vote, and many people are saying, in what way does this erode marriage? I mean, I'm married, there are people out there who are married. How does it affect the institution of marriage and my marriage?
Right. The quick summary of how it does that is that gay marriage, among the many things it does, is it eliminates the idea that children deserve a mom and a dad. It also simultaneously has enormous repercussions for religious liberty. If you look at every state, if you look at every country that has legalized gay marriage or same-sex civil unions, the very first people who get punished are Christians. And so, you know, we're looking at the law in New York. It seems to pose some threats to Catholic adoption agencies, to individual peoples in their private conscience. And so I think that the thing that we're beginning to realize as a church is that gay marriage has consequences for everyone, because the family is such a fundamental building block of society that any efforts to erode it, and gay marriage very much does so, affects the entire common good of all of us.
This was a legislature in the 11th hour that kind of push this through. It wasn't expected to happen that way, and indeed it was Catholics that flipped the vote and went the other way. What do you think should be the response of the bishops in New York? They've come out very strongly and said this shouldn't have happened. We're upset, we're disappointed, Archbishop Dolan said last Sunday after the Mass. I was there. Right. Where does this go, and what do you think they should be doing at this point?
Well, I've been writing on my website this week that, particularly in the case of Andrew Cuomo, who is Catholic, he represents sort of a trifecta of someone who deserves to be publicly told by the church that the things he's doing is separating himself from the church.
Andrew Cuomo being the governor of New York, for those watching internationally.
Right, who eagerly signed the bill, and by all intents and purposes was the person who was the motive force behind passing it and convincing some senators to switch sides.
Why do you think he was so committed to this issue?
I think because, frankly, he takes liberal progressive political philosophy as more important and more motivating to him than his Catholic belief. I mean, I think that's the only way to really describe it.
Now, your father, Ed Peters, is a renowned canon lawyer. He's a consultant to various Vatican committees, including the Apostolic Signature, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah.
This week, he wrote that he believes there are a couple of canons that kick in when you're talking about Andrew Cuomo's actions in New York. First, Canon 915. Tell people what that means, how this deals with reception of communion. Why do you believe, and do you think your dad believes, that communion should be denied to Andrew Cuomo?
Well, Cuomo, first of all, is kind of the trifecta. He's adamantly pro-abortion. He's just signed a bill that redefines marriage, regardless of its consequences for the Catholic Church, by the way. And he's living in public sin with his girlfriend, Sandra Leaf, who's on the Food Network. And so for all these reasons, Andrew Cuomo fits the category of 915, which I'm going to paraphrase, says that Catholics who cause grave scandal ought not to present themselves for communion, and if they do present themselves, they ought to be refused, because their personal sin and their personal actions has separated themselves from the body of Christ.
No, it's a public act, right?
That's right.
I mean, it's a fact that it's not just something they're doing in private, it's something they're doing publicly. Your father has called it public concubinage, which is kind of a...
That's right. Well, it's not a likable word, it's not a likable thing.
He also mentioned Canon 1717. This is a bit more serious. What does that require?
That actually outpaces my knowledge of canon law, I'm sorry to admit.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to go, being the son of a lawyer, you don't talk about what you don't know.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it there and we'll come back to it later. It's interesting. I have your dad's article. We'll get into that a little later. What do you think the posture should be of the bishops, and how grave do you think this passing in the legislature was, given that in every state where this is put up to a ballot by the people, it's voted down?
That's right.
You've got 6 states now that have legalized gay marriage. The rest obviously don't. What do you think is going to be the national reaction? What should the bishops of New York do?
Well, I think Bishop DiMarzio's comments, he's the bishop of the Bronx and Queens. I think his comments were, they give us the best clue for where the bishops are moving. Again, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically what he said was that perhaps our attitudes and the way we've been handling this issue before have not been enough. And so he says the church needs to speak up more clearly and more loudly, because it's very clear that the sort of methods they've been using so far aren't working. So, I mean, there's no question that the people who wish to redefine marriage are going to keep going. What I am hoping to see, and what I think we're already seeing, is more and more Catholics and Christians realizing that they have to be involved. There's still more of us than there are of them. And so long term, I'm still very optimistic that we will retain and further protect the definition of marriage that we now have in law and has worked for the entirety of human history. I mean, the fact that when men and women come together in love and raise the next generation, wonderful things happen. That's not an accident. It's the way God built us. And I think that societies, when they abandon this, are in, for a very bad time. I don't think we're there yet.
This is interesting. We got an email, a text just came in. Does this mean that any two consenting adults can get married in New York?
It's interesting because obviously we already limit who can get married. We limit how old you have to be. We limit like what degree of consanguinity, which is to say you can't marry your brother or your cousin. Right. And so my understanding is that all those laws still apply. The difference now is you no longer have to be of the opposite sex to contract a marriage under the law of New York.
But as some lawyers have opined this week, if two men can marry and two women can marry, why can't three men marry?
Right, and in Canada, this is exactly what they're moving to. They're now talking about why should we deny what are called polyamorous couples, where there are more than two people who say they want to be in a marriage contract together.
Interesting.
It's a slippery slope, but it's true.
Reading a piece that covers some of your father's interventions here, Ed Peters is suggesting that the governor's conduct warrants a canonical investigation under Canon 1717, which applies a just penalty to those who, quote, in a public show or speech, published writings, or other uses of the instruments of social communications gravely injure good morals. Now, what that just penalty would be, that would be up to the local authorities, the bishops, to determine.
Right.
So,
and they're all very serious.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that any of these senators who voted to redefine marriage, the Catholic ones, did this without knowing what the church's position is ludicrous. Every one of those senators, Catholic senators that decided to vote to redefine marriage, knew what the church's law is. And I think what we're seeing is that if you fundamentally oppose the church, there are consequences. First to yourself, and second of all, publicly.
And one of our emailers wrote in, and Thomas just misspoke. I do it all the time. You said Bishop DiMarzio was the bishop of the Bronx and Queens. No, he's the bishop of Brooklyn.
Sorry.
So that's fine. We make these mistakes. Welcome to live television.
Watchers are really on it.
Paul is a watchdog out there. I like that. Also, we just saw in Rhode Island, civil union bill passed. You had Bishop Tobin responding very forcefully. What do you make of his commentary? And we'll put that up on my Facebook page so you all can read it later.
The most important thing that Bishop Tobin said, beyond what the church's teaching is about any sort of legislation that erodes marriage, is that Catholics are absolutely prohibited from engaging in these new civil unions. Personally speaking, I think Bishop Tobin has it exactly right.
Okay, and we're going to talk more about that and a few other issues. Tom Peters is going to stay with us, and as we sort through your questions, you can send them to worldover@EWTN.com and call in. I want to introduce you to the Holy See's permanent observer to the United Nations. He's a native of India, an experienced Vatican diplomat who has previously served as the nuncio to Iraq and Jordan. He was appointed to the UN post last year by Pope Benedict and has wasted no time making his voice heard in this international body. I sat down with him this week to discuss his role as the Holy See's permanent observer and some of the challenges he faces at the UN. Here's Archbishop Francis Chullikatt. Now, this is not your first trip to the Holy See mission. You spent some time there earlier. Tell us what you did there.
I was here before from 2000 to 2004. Well, I came in as a novice at that time. United Nations was an organization which I always looked with admiration for the great things they have done in the past. So I came in with all that zeal and fervor to see the United Nations doing only good things to the world and working for the development and the peace and the interreligious dialogue, the harmony, the brotherhood. You can name a lot of these values that we hold so dear to our heart.
Right.
And so I came with a great deal of expectation to the United Nations. And I started with the Security Council.
How did the reality of the UN compare with your expectations before you got there? And we're working intimately and closely with these diplomats there.
Yes. Well, my expectation, as I said, was very high about because I thought that the UN can really do a great deal in bringing peace and harmony around the world, and they would have a lot of respect towards the religious and cultural values. But from my experience so far, what I see is that that respect for the national interests of a country, especially if that country belongs to a developing nation, or we used to call them in the past the third world countries, you know, the underdeveloped countries, who are chronically dependent on the foreign aid. Unfortunately, there are certain countries at the United Nations that are targeting these countries, using these countries to support their national issues.
And their agenda.
Their agenda, which they want to internationalize.
We've seen this in the past on reporting.
Yes.
You know, in my personal coverage, being in Cairo, being in China as part of these markups of these big documents, it almost, the foreign aid becomes almost a coercion for these countries to move along and really subvert the values of their own people and their own governments.
Exactly. And when you said the word correctly, government, because it's the government that is in charge that tries to distort the values of the people whom they represent.
Now, before we get into some specific documents that I know you've been wrestling with and debating in recent weeks, I want to talk for a moment about the permanent observer status. You are the permanent observer at the UN. What does that mean? What is the Vatican's role at the UN? You can't vote.
Yes, on the 1st of July 2004, we formalized with a resolution our observer status at the United Nations. And we got a resolution which was adopted by consensus, by acclamation, by the General Assembly. We are talking about 192 countries that endorse the presence of the Holy See there as an observer mission. And we were welcomed wholeheartedly through this resolution to the United Nations. And by this resolution in 2004, our status was practically formalized, and we were given certain rights. I can just mention some of them. The right to participate in the general debate, which we were not doing initially. Because we are an observer. Only the member states used to participate in it. But with this resolution, we have been recognized as an observer state. So that status has been conferred. It's not conferred, but just normally recognized. Recognized, because UN does not confer on the Holy See the statehood. It was already there. So this was recognized, formally recognized through this resolution. So we will be participating every year in the general debate where we can really talk to the international community what are the major issues that the Holy See is interested, the Catholic Church is interested in the international arena. Besides that, we have other rights, the right of reply. For example, a certain member state during a general debate or a conference criticizes the Holy See on a particular issue. And the Holy See can take the floor and reply. Formally, and that will go into the records of the UN. Also, all our interventions go into the records of the UN, and that will serve for the posterity to go and see what is the position of the Holy See. And you can also see the consistency with which the Holy See used to follow and is still following all the topics at the United Nations. Let me also finish with the right to have. We can also distribute our communications in the General Assembly or in all the committees.
So materials and...
We can distribute our interventions, our speeches, as a written text to all the members of the United Nations. And we can also, if you want, co-sponsor draft resolutions and decisions if that resolution or a decision make reference to the Holy See, which means if it has anything to do with the interests of the Holy See, we are entitled to co-sponsor it.
Let's talk about one of the major issues that time and time again we hear this. In speaking to diplomats from other countries, I hear this all the time. Population. The population around the world is exploding. It is a drain on the environment, on resources, on economies. You would say what?
The Church's position on this issue is very clear. The human beings are not the problem for the underdevelopment. Human beings are a resource for the development. So our position on this issue is that it is by investing in children that you will be promoting development, not the other way around. It is not by eliminating the poor people that you are going to eradicate poverty. So it has to be very clear. We've made that very clear in our intervention.
Are you amazed that there seems to be almost an international consensus now that the aid that needs to be provided to these countries, particularly Africa, South America, developing countries, is contraception and abortion on demand, rather than wells, water, clean food, access to agriculture and a way of life? It seems to be this emphasis on this contraceptive solution.
Yes.
Your thoughts on that, particularly as regards Africa? There was this UN Commission on Social Development. You objected to the document because it called abortion a human right.
Yes.
Why did you object?
Our position is that coming back to the human beings as a resource for every nation and society, we should be starting investing in the basics of the needs of every human being. What does that mean? Basic health care, primary education, and the rights of the minorities, religious freedom. So these are some of the issues that UN should be investing heavily. So we continue to insist that, and in many of the resolutions and documents we come up with this idea. Invest in the primary education and the basic health care. I can tell you from my personal experience, I have visited so many villages in Iraq and in many other countries where I served in the nunciatures. I go to a particular village, a rural area, distantly placed from the outskirts, even from the outskirts, distant from the outskirts of the society, the cities. And you can't find any UN presence there. Whose presence you find there? Catholic Church's presence is there. And I'm talking about a Muslim countries. The Catholic Church is present in the farthest areas of these developing nations, investing in the poor people. And why we are doing that? Because we believe in the human beings and the greatest potential they have.
There was a resolution on the family that came up recently.
Yes.
And in it, they didn't refer to the mother or father in that resolution, and you were concerned about that. Why?
Certain member states within the United Nations are trying to change the concept of the notion which is called parents. They are objecting to the proposal that the Holy See is making to include, you can always say parents, but at the same time, why don't you use also as a synonym or another expression of these parents as mother, father and mother? But then we get the strongest objection from a number of countries within the United Nations. And they are so allergic to the mention of the words father and mother, and they are more concerned about mentioning parents or the caregivers. So they go for these neutral terms
that you can redefine at will.
In view of redefining the basic concept of the word parents. So what our suspicion is that, and it's not only that, we have also talked about it very openly during negotiations. Our suspicion is that they are trying to bring in the LGBT issue into the concept of the parents. So if you call father and mother, which is the way that we understand the family, they cannot change the notion of the family. But by just calling this neutral term as parents, there could be the gay couple there.
Now, some of those diplomats will say, what is the problem with that? These people have adopted these children and they're raising them as their own, these gay couples, lesbian couples. Why is the Holy See so opposed to that?
We know that the family is the basic unit of the society. And when we talk about the family, we know what it means. And we don't want to have it changed. A family is based on marriage. For Catholics, it is a sacrament. It is not just a simple contract, civil contract. for us, it is something sacred. So the international community should be respectful of our belief. And that is part of the religious freedom and the freedom of conscience.
And I've had conversations in preparation for our interview with diplomats from various delegations around the world. They say in recent days, and I'm going to quote them, they think the Holy See is today more outspoken, more involved in the negotiations than ever before, particularly in the pro-life arena. How much of that is due to you? They claim it's since your arrival that things have become very clear and outspoken. You're right out there. Is that a conscious decision on your part?
I think it has been going on for years, because the mission of the Holy See to the United Nations, we have been building up over the years. Mm-hmm. So each permanent observer who comes, they try to do their share of the responsibility. You know, Rome was not built in a day. Yeah. We slowly build up our presence and our voice at the United Nations. Mm-hmm. So each of us trying to do the best we can so that the church's voices can be heard loud and clear at the United Nations and in other fora of the international community meetings that takes place even outside the United Nations. The reason why they are saying that the voice is now becoming more and more clearer, or it's becoming louder, is that because we have been participating more frequently.
Why does all of this matter, Archbishop? A lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans watch this and they go, oh, the United Nations, what difference does it make what's in those documents? But it actually has real import in the locality and back home. Tell us how. How does that translate?
The importance of our intervention in these proceedings is that, first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, all these things go into the record. Mm-hmm. After 20 or 30 years, if someone wants to go and study what was the Holy See's position on abortion, for example, then they have all our statements there. And you can invariably see the consistency with which the Holy See has been addressing these issues at the United Nations. And the second point is that we have to talk about these things very explicitly so that people who are negotiating, they will know that the Holy See has not changed lately anything on these issues, and they are continuing to repeat the same thing, and sometimes we are even reinforcing our argument in the light of the latest studies or the research that has been made on these issues.
It should also be said these documents are often used as a benchmark for national law back in the countries.
Yes.
I mean, that's the weight of these documents. They are then held up and said, look, the whole world community has agreed to this.
Not only that, once the UN adopts a resolution on such issues, they call them as soft laws, which will, in turn, will make the so-called customary law. That will find its place eventually into international conventions.
Your Excellency, in the middle of June, an HIV/AIDS declaration went out, a political declaration from the UN. You objected to that declaration. Why did you object? Many assumed because of comments made by Pope Benedict, or the reportage of comments made by Pope Benedict related to condom use of male prostitutes. He was conjecturing, and that was largely read as some sort of moral movement in the direction of condom use to protect people against AIDS. Is that your understanding?
Regarding the condom issue, I really wanted to make it clear to our friends at the United Nations, the Church has not changed anything on that issue. Because after this manipulated report that appeared immediately before the publication of the Holy Fathers, that interview publication, The Light of the World, somehow or other, people started talking about the Church has changed its position on the issue of condoms, which is not the case. In fact, there was an explanation of position from the Holy See, from the Secretary of State, which was published, so that it was made clear that the Church has not changed its position Only thing is that certain media distorted the words of the Holy Father in favor of certain ideology that is being now propagated, especially when we talk about the HIV/AIDS. Coming back to this high-level meeting on the HIV/AIDS, we talked about the condoms as a prevention measure as suggested by the United Nations. We opposed to that policy that the United Nations wanted to adopt, because even as the Holy Father himself says, when we talk about the prevention measures that are to be adopted in fighting the HIV/AIDS, first and foremost what we are talking about, the so-called AVC policy. First, abstinence, and be faithful, and then condoms. This is the UN's agenda. Our position is that if we can really implement through education abstinence and fidelity within the marriage and outside the marriage, the disease which we call as HIV/AIDS can be treated on a long-term basis, and it can even be eradicated. Why I am saying that? I'm not just making it up. We have concrete examples for this. Uganda is one of the examples.
One of the only countries where it's going down.
Is going down.
And why?
And why? Because they apply the abstinence and fidelity policy there. And it works. And it will work on a long-term basis, because it's only a matter of educating people to be sexually responsible. We have so many other priorities also. But if you are teaching the young people to be sexually responsible, to be faithful, and to practice abstinence, then you don't need to give anything. And you don't even have to spend all this money that we are spending all over the world.
In your intervention, I was surprised to learn the church really, a lot of people say, oh, you're just a bunch of cranks, you're moralizing. The fact is the church provides 25% of the care for people living with HIV/AIDS,
yes,
which I was totally unaware of, and I imagine a lot of people watching are. I mean, so that gives the church
yes,
instant credibility on this issue. They're actually caring on the ground. I know here in New York City, where we're doing this interview,
exactly,
downtown, Mother Teresa's order has a home dedicated to HIV/AIDS victims, and they help them, they bathe them, they care for them, they give them the medication. It's a haven. And I remember years ago we were down there, and one of the guys told me, I lived like a dog, but I die like an angel.
Exactly.
Because of the love he was receiving.
Exactly, exactly. Because, and I also mentioned to some of my colleagues at the United Nations, Catholic Church is a big stakeholder in this, because we are investing heavily. As you said, 25% of the health services that we are giving is for the HIV/AIDS patients. And in many countries, and if you are to go and see at the United States, how many countries are investing like the Catholic Church in this deserving cause? And for these people who are in some countries, they are the outcasts of the society. But we go and help them. So the commitment and dedication with which the church is investing for the good of the people is something amazing. And there, even if these people are telling against the church's involvement in this, it's not going to any way lessen the credibility of the church and its commitment and its service and dedication for the good of the people, whether they are a Christian or a non-Christian or even an atheist. For us, any needy person is our neighbor that deserves our attention and care, and we will continue to do that.
We want to thank Archbishop Chullikatt and Father Chris Pollard at the Holy See Mission for helping us set up that interview and granting it to us. And we're pleased that we're continued to be joined by Thomas Peters of the American Papist blog over at CatholicVote.org. I want to take some emails, one relating here first to the UN. While the UN is preoccupied with the imaginary epidemic of Islamophobia, does it have any plans to address the actual epidemic of Christians being attacked and killed throughout the Muslim world, even in moderate Muslim countries? Your thought?
Well, I remember seeing a headline of a study that was published just recently saying that Christians, by far, are martyred more often around the world for their faith. The actual number is staggering. I haven't had a chance to check it out, but the claim is several tens of thousands of Christians are martyred worldwide every year. I mean, the church, you know, the underground church, the church in persecution exists even to this own, you know, our own day.
No, it goes on and on. And when you hear
bothering.
of the things happening in Sudan right now, Archbishop Bishop Gassis has been updating us on this situation. It is terrible what's happening. Tens of thousands of people having to move out, villages being burned, all because this separation, which they voted on, is about to take place between North and South Sudan. It is a tragedy. We will, of course, keep you posted on all of that, but this is terrible. Let's go to Marianne from New York. Go ahead, Marianne. What's your question?
Hi, Raymond. How are you? Good
Hi,
evening.
very
You
well.
and your guests. Good. My question is there a possibility that this new gay marriage law can be reversed either through a public vote or through maybe a constitutional amendment? And if there are any movements
Underway
right now that I could participate in to have this overturned?
Okay, Marianne, thanks for the question.
Right. That's an excellent question, and it's an essential point. This is not over. The organization I work with, the National Organization for Marriage, has already pledged $2 million to seeing that the senators who voted the wrong way are replaced by senators who will vote the right way. In the entire negotiation process, there was an option given to let the people of New York decide this in a referendum vote. And the Democrats are the ones who said absolutely not, because they know every time the people actually get a chance to vote, they vote for traditional marriage. And so the end game for reversing this would involve retaking a pro-marriage majority in both sides of the New York State House, and eventually having to deal with Andrew Cuomo, who shows no signs of changing his mind. But it's absolutely possible, and I'm going to be working very hard for it. So if you visit nationformarriage.org or visit the website of the New York Catholic Conference, this is not over. We just had a setback.
What do you say to people? And here's Brian writing in from Mobile. He says, as a practicing Catholic and a non-practicing homosexual, I do not support gay marriage. However, as a citizen, I do not discern how to disapprove of same-sex civil unions, given that I cannot find it in my reasoning to disapprove of the civil rights of others who believe differently from me. What is the Catholic stance on same-sex civil unions as separate from same-sex marriage, be it legal or religious?
Well, the first point to make is that the burden of proof is on people who want to redefine marriage, who want to say there's a civil right to marrying the person you happen to be romantically or physically involved with at the time. That's not the way the laws of the United States have typically operated. The reason that government is in the love business in the first place is because the love between a man and a wife actually results in children, which the state has an interest in seeing are raised in the absolute best possible environment.
More citizens, more tax base. It's in the better interest of a society.
Right, and we've seen every time that a marriage culture breaks down, government has to come in, often at an extraordinary price, to fix what otherwise the natural family is best suited to do. As far as where the church's position on civil unions goes,
there was a time when some bishops were sort of supportive of civil unions. That has shifted in recent years.
Right. I think because some very hard lessons were learned. Earlier this year when Illinois legalized same-sex civil unions, already now 3 adoption agencies in that state, Catholic adoption agencies, have been forced to shutter their doors and stop caring for kids. And so, the bishops, I think anyone would have to say, as much as they're vilified, have been anything except reasonable and accommodating as far as they possibly can. But there comes a certain point when there's no other options on the table except to, along with saying the truth, do the politically hard choices to, put, all the resources on the line. And I think that's where Bishop Tobin's statement, and you should, everyone should go read that. That's the way forward, I think.
Yeah. I want to go to the phones. Jack from Ohio, very quickly. Jack, what's your question or your comment?
While watching the outroar happen in New York on that, I'm just looking at our officials that I'd like for you to address the fact that the Department of Veterans Administration has just recently come out for any military funerals cannot use the name of God or Jesus Christ.
Right. I saw this story, Jack, and thanks for bringing it up. I've been sort of monitoring this story. The American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, have now joined a lawsuit to sue, and we should say these are officials of the Veteran Affairs Committee, but they're only in Houston. It's the Houston National Cemetery where this is happening. So it's localized. This isn't happening at Arlington Cemetery. It isn't happening at other places where they bury the war dead. It seems to be isolated, and I'll just read this this to you. The Department of Veterans Affairs issued a statement. It says they respect every veteran and their family's rights to a burial service that honors their faith tradition. It says they employ 1,000 chaplains who preside over religious burials. And, you know, this seems to be a limited situation that has been reported as if it's a national epidemic, when it seems to be confined to that one Houston cemetery.
And the instant public outcry that is telling these people in Houston they got to, you know, get with the program. I mean, this is just outrageous, is why this isn't a national problem. Because when individuals try to, you know, do something so frankly offensive to our, you know, military heroes, there's a public outcry and these things get nipped in the bud. You know, it's the old adage I've been listening to, you know, reminding myself of often these past weeks, is that if you don't fight the little battle when you have a big chance of winning, you're eventually forced to fight the big battle when you have little chance of winning. And so you just have to be, you know, observant. You have to stay on things, and that way you don't have to, you know, make even more sacrifices later.
What do you make, and I want to touch on this, we've been getting a lot of email traffic on this as well. The Supreme Court came out this week and they invalidated a ban on selling violent video games to children of a certain age. They said this violates the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Your thoughts on this overturning this ban?
My first reaction would be it certainly doesn't violate the right, it certainly doesn't overturn the rights of parents to you know, observe what their kids are buying. And so, you know, while the Supreme Court has found some sort of basic right to doing this, as far as the church is concerned, it's still immoral if you're, like, you know, buying a video game that shows depraved images. And parents have a responsibility to see that and to know about what their children are doing in the online world.
Well, you know, in the dissent, Justice Thomas and Justice Breyer, hardly in simpatico in most situations. Breyer said this creates a duality in the law in that we already legislate and restrict pornographic sales to children. Why would you allow pseudo-pornographic and horribly violent videos to these same children? And Clarence Thomas raised the very issue you did, that the First Amendment, as envisioned by the founders initially, did not entitle minors to be given information without the consent of their parents. And guys, take that video down. I don't want to see these violent images. Just take them away. We're contributing to the problem here, so let's not. This is a family show, and I'd like to keep it that way. Thank you, Birmingham. Let's go to another email here. It says the 30 states that have now rejected same-sex marriage did so by a vote from the people. How does such an important decision happen in the case of New York without going to that sort of vote? How can we keep such an important decision in the ballot box? Rory.
Well, that's a very simple answer. The reason that the people of New York were not allowed a chance to vote on something as fundamental as marriage is because the senators and assemblymen that they sent to Albany refused to allow that option to happen. And so I would say, like, right now, get out a pen and paper and just look at where, if you live in New York, look at where your representative, look at where your senator voted, and remember that when next November rolls around. This is avoidable. Elections have consequences, and if you elect the right people, good things happen. If you elect the wrong people, bad things happen. So this was, again, the tragedy of New York was that we could have avoided this.
This is from Joan Sheridan in Massachusetts. She writes, your guest mentioned that according to a particular canon, Andrew Cuomo should not be allowed to go to communion. Does he think that the governor ever goes to Mass and presents himself for communion?
Yes.
We know that for a fact.
In an interview with Maureen Dowd over the weekend, he mentioned that while he normally abstains, he still goes, and if he normally abstains, that means sometimes he goes.
And in his inauguration Mass, he took communion.
That's right. Right. So, I mean, it's very clear that there's some level of knowledge that Cuomo has that he's doing something that, you know, maybe he shouldn't be doing. But that doesn't abjure the church from having a responsibility in its pastoral ministry to give him a medicinal penalty publicly so he can know without a doubt where the church stands.
There was another interesting story. I'd like to get your take on it. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton held an event for gay rights at the State Department, and she announced there that various diplomats had been instrumental in booking Lady Gaga to sing at a pro-gay pride event in Rome. Apparently, she also divulged, and I hadn't seen this, that the State Department, the United States State Department and diplomats had also been instrumental in organizing marches, gay rights marches in Slovakia, Turkey, Honduras, Russia, China. Should this be part of our diplomatic outreach, and what do you think will be the reaction from the countries we're attempting to interact with here?
Well, I think it's offensive to good Americans that this is how their taxpayer dollars are being spent. This is the sort of things that we're helping to orchestrate. And I'm really glad you bring it up because I think it is something that should generate more outrage. You don't invite Lady Gaga, especially considering some of the blasphemous material in her latest music, to Rome without knowing that there's something else in Rome. And so I think that it's not a coincidence. They chose that. I would argue that we can't know for sure, but it's just a weird coincidence that happened to be where they decided we really needed to have an extraordinarily, extravagant gay, parade.
I found it curious. I mean, if Lady Gaga wants to go sing at a concert, let her go sing at a concert. But if the American government suddenly gets involved, why are we? It would be like us petitioning some extremist imam to go and preach in the heart of Israel. I mean, it's outrageous and it's diplomatically kind of silly.
Right. One little point that I remember reasoning from the story was that the place of the concert was the Circus Maximus, and so I mean the same mistakes get made by society over and over again. The question is, are Christians going to shut it down?
Well,
get out of there.
No lions this time?
Yeah,
there
well,
were no lions
I don't
available?
know. I think there's some perilous things for your soul.
Okay. To follow Thomas Peters and his American Papist blog, visit CatholicVote.org. Thanks for being with us, Thomas.
Thank you, Raymond.
A very happy Independence Day to all of you watching in the United States. As I was reflecting on the great price paid for freedom in America and around the world, I was reminded of the words of Pope John Paul II during a papal visit in 1996 when he said, "Freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought." Something to ponder this July 4th. That's all the time we have. Until next week, you can find news updates, and I offer plenty throughout the week, and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter or on my Facebook page. Just go to RaymondArroyo.com. You can click through from there. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. Bye now.